last lesson of this module. And this particular module or this particular lesson is all about user identities and profiles. So here itself, I would like to give you some uh, insight about the user identities. Okay. The user identities can be what exactly the user identity is. What I'm talking about here itself, we are referring to the directory service. Which directory service? If I'm working on on-prem, it is Azure Active Directory. If it is, if I'm working on a Windows on-prem, it is Windows Active Directory. But on the other side, if I'm working onto the cloud, it is Azure Active Directory. So depending on where exactly we are working on, under which particular platform we are working on, so that is how we can pick and choose. See, most of the customers there have been using the on-prem Windows Active Directory, which is as good as a traditional directory itself, isn't it? Your domain controller, your ADDS, your Windows AD, it's one of the same thing. You've got multiple domain controllers which are running in. You've got group policies, you've got LDAP, you've got a Kerberos, everything which is coming in. So with that, at least we have the Windows Active Directory. Similarly, if you are going with the cloud, which cloud? Microsoft Cloud Service. Whether you talk about Microsoft 365, whether you talk about Windows Intune, whether you talk about Azure DevOps, anything, or whether you talk about the Azure environment, Azure subscriptions. In all these cases, you are getting the Azure Active Directory as the backbone. So Azure AD, which falls under the platform as a service category, PaaS. So that means that you don't need to go and maintain and manage the infrastructure for yourself, for that directory service at least. So that Azure Active Directory is something, the one which is very, very relevant in terms of managing the identities, authentication, authorization. So if I talk about the user, see, when you work on on-prem, where are these identities residing? These identities are all residing in your on-prem Windows AD, and you organize them by using OUs, isn't it? Organization units, OUs, and then you go inside of the GPUs, group policy objects. And for the authentication, you are using Kerberos. For the query, you are using LDAP. So, but when you moved on to the cloud, which is Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory has its own mechanism of authentication, web services, SAML, federation service, single sign-on, OpenID Connect, authorization, OAuth, open authorization, OAuth. And whereas, as in the policies are being considered, they are using conditional access policies, CAP. CAP stands for conditional access policies. There are no GPUs. There is no Kerberos. There is no LDAP. There are no OUs in the Azure Active Directory. If you try to compare them with the on-prem, it's quite different. So in that case, that it's a robust product and it is quite compatible, in which you can simply integrate with the on-prem AD itself also. And there are different types of users. So ideally itself, it becomes very, very important for us to figure it out, to identify the licensing methods, identity methods, structure methods. All right. Yeah. So this particular lesson gives us a very clear understanding about managing the identities, setting the identities, and picking up the right solutions, client deployments, RDPs, hybrid identity. That is one of the key areas, and plan for the Azure AD Connect as well also, isn't it? So here it comes. So see, basically, guys, when it comes down to the licensing itself, see, access Windows 10 and Windows 7 at no additional cost if in case if you're having the eligible Windows or 365 license. So this is something good. Most of the organizations, they are already having such licenses. So that becomes with a no additional cost. Similarly, the access to the desktops by using Windows Server remote desktop services at no additional cost if you are having the Microsoft RDS licenses as well. So overall, if in case you are having the Microsoft 365 subscriptions, if you are having the RDS subscriptions, RDS licenses, in that case, you can at least uh, have a no additional cost and you can use those licenses as well also. All right. So this is the, one area which should be taken care of. And this is something very important where we talk about what when we talk about storage. By the way, uh, what I'm referring up to the storage. Why storage? Right? Why? Because depending on the sessions which you're conducting, depending on the configurations which you're doing up, all right. In that case, you can have different types of storage as well. A reason now here itself, as we have been working on Azure, Azure offers you with various different types of storage solutions. First, there are two categories, managed or unmanaged. Managed in the sense the storage is being managed by Azure. Unmanaged, unmanaged is being taken care of by customer. So there are certain responsibilities against that storage depending on the type which you go for. If I go with the managed, Azure takes the responsibility in terms of availability or the backup, the security. And if it's unmanaged, the unmanaged storage has to be managed by the customer. So the customer can decide the replication, availability, backup, security, filtering, firewall, access. So there are two different types. One, managed, second, unmanaged. So both the cases are there itself. So in those cases, ideal itself, in many cases, if I talk about Azure Virtual Desktop, we are talking about the profiles. So obviously in such cases, the profiles storage, you can store your profiles, your profile containers, and for that itself, you're using FSLogix, all right, to set up the profiles, to store the profiles. Likewise, for example, if I'm using a roaming profile, at that particular point of time, these profiles is immediately available and appears into the system exactly as a regular standard user profile. So when a user signs in the container is dynamically attached to the environment using the natively supported hard disk, VHD or VHDX, and the user profile is immediately available and appears exactly like a native user profile. So if we talk about from the storage perspective itself, Azure also has different uh, choices. You've got Azure files, you've got Azure NetApp files, you've got storage spaces directs, right? So there are different use cases, and these use cases, they do differ in terms of region-wise support, services support, redundancy, tiers and performance, everything, capacity, and also from the management perspective as well. All right. Same way, if in case if I'm talking about desktop client deployments, say, so how many pools you're having in this case? In this example, they are using two different pools, pool A, pool B, and probably in one case you're using the pooled, in another one you're using the personal itself also, right? So to do two different approaches depending on the different departments. All right. So maybe the sales and engineering or frontline workers, anything it can be. All right. So what are you setting them up? You're creating nothing but the application groups which are a part of associated to that host pool. And this application group is nothing but the one which contains your desktops, the virtual desktops, and the virtual applications as well. All right. So different pools as well coming up. As far as in case if I'm talking about RDP, see, we do have the remote desktop web client, and you could have a web version itself also, right? Which uses a compatible web browser to access what? To access the remote resources, depending on what has been given and access to you. So remote desktop web client is also available. As we have been talking about identities, all right. So see, in this entire section, hybrid is what? In general, hybrid is a very generic term. We have to clearly understand that which type of the hybrid are we talking about? Whether it is identity is a hybrid, network is a hybrid, or you can say storage is a hybrid, monitoring is a hybrid, backup is a hybrid, disaster recovery is a hybrid, anything it can be, anything. So here itself, we are going to talk about hybrid identity with the Azure Active Directory. So this allows us to connect the on-prem Active Directory to the Azure Active Directory. Reason? Why? Because the customers have got a flexibility to take their corporate users from the on-prem to the cloud. And then after, they can go and decide what they can decide. They can decide that to give them the delegation and to give them the access to the services, consume. So whether they are going to be used in terms of management of the service or whether they are going to use to access the service, anything it can be. So hybrid identity is very, very important. There are various other business use cases in which identity hybrid becomes one of the major base use case. It has to be there. So when it comes to the hybrid identity, one of the other factors which comes into the place in terms of decision making is which authentication method. So how many authentication methods you can see? You've got three: federation service, pass-through authentication, password hash synchronization. So if I talk about password hash synchronization, this password hash synchronization, that means from your on-prem Active Directory, the password hashes can be synchronized to the Azure AD. Why? Why? Because onto the on-prem AD in your Windows Active Directory, the passwords are stored in the hashing method. So with that, you can achieve a same sign-on. Same sign-on means the users, they can sign in with the same credential onto the on-prem and the same credential onto the cloud. Yes, the authentication happens twice. One at the on-prem if he logs into the on-prem, and if he logs into the cloud, the Azure AD authenticates. So this is something with the one which is one of the most simplest method to set up. On the other side, if in case if I'm looking for a single sign-on solution, pass-through authentication gives it to you. So in the PTA stands for pass-through authentication, in which you are not synchronizing the password hashes. You're just synchronizing the identities with the help of Azure AD. With the pass-through authentication itself, you are having an agent on the on-prem. Which agent? The PTA agent, which acts as a mediator. So if configured, the users who tries to log into the cloud, they are being, for their credentials, they are being validated from the on-prem. So it is also quite easy to set up. It's not that too challenging. But the thing is that when you set up the PTA agents, it has to be at least two of them, minimum two for the availability, and they are being load balanced by itself. All right. So on the other hand, if I'm looking for a federation where itself the users are being redirected for the authentication. So in this case, there are two redirections happening. One, for the authentication, the user is being redirected from the cloud to the on-prem, and after getting successfully validated, authenticated, they are being redirected back to the on cloud Azure AD. So federation itself, it is using TLS, which does requires a certificate. Whereas if I'm talking about the pass-through, password hash, they don't require any certificates separately. It's all inbuilt. But on the other side, the federation, it does require a separate certificate as well. So the idea is basically to understand if you're setting up the hybrid identity, pick and choose your relevant authentication methods. So if you see on your screen, these are some of the comparison methods depending on the decision making, right? Whether to be managed onto the cloud, whether you want to synchronize, whether you want to go with a combination, right? So in some cases, you can go with the options. You can go with the combinations of them as well, also if you want to. All right. Okay. This way, it becomes very, very easy for us to set them up. So ideally, see, basically, I'll just take you back once again to the previous screen. So these are the three areas which we talked about. All right. Password hash. This is again a sign-in method that synchronizes the hash, isn't it? Which we talked about. Pass-through we talked about. Federation we talked about. So the setup and the services have to be configured, and the architecture has to be designed well. So if I try to compare all these three, the one which requires too much of administrative setup, which is none other than your federation service. All right, with this one here. Okay, guys. So with this itself, we have almost reached towards the end of the last lesson of this module for the day one. So before we end of the session itself, guys, let me give you a quick recap about what exactly we talked about, what exactly we discussed. The idea of this particular day one session was to make you familiar with the section of having an understanding about the architecture, right? Getting some decision factors, implementing them, structuring them, understanding the components of the Azure Virtual Desktop. As we have been working on Azure itself, it becomes very, very critical for us to plan, design, structure in terms of VM sizing, compute, billing, cost optimization methods, limits, talking about architecture components of Azure Virtual Desktop, which is being taken care of by Azure, what are being taken care of by the customer, keeping in mind and consideration in terms of bit of storage, networking, subnets, connectivity, network latency, optimization. All right. So the idea was to basically to understand all of these sections, and also in terms of identities, what different types of identities are available, whether it is cloud, guest. Guests are basically externals, right, from the different organization. Even they can be given an access, and hybrid, which becomes the on-prem. And when it comes down to the hybrid, it becomes a key factor for the authentication methods, in which we discussed about these three, which is password hash, pass through, federation, So when it comes down to the setup, yes, they do have their own process of configuring, but at least you have some understanding about the product. So implementing these authentication methods, it's very, very important. All right. And for the identity synchronization, they're using Azure AD Connect. I repeat it again. They're using Azure AD Connect has to be configured. So Azure AD Connect can be configured as Express or Advanced Custom. So which gives you the flexibility to pick and choose the authentication methods. Otherwise, if I go with the Express setup, it uses PHS, password hash synchronization by default. But if you go with the custom advanced setup for the Azure AD Connect, it gives you the flexibility to pick and choose your different authentication methods as well. So, guys, with this discussion of these topics, we are coming towards the end of the day. And I hope you learned, you're taking back something with you. And obviously, we have already mentioned up there are a few homework labs which are supposed to be done by you guys. So make sure that you take out some time and to perform them itself. Lastly, I would like to say thank you to each one of you who had been attending this session for the past 2 hours. And thank you for being patient, listening me actively, and giving your attention as well also. So once again, thank you guys so much to all of you. With this, we are coming and ending up with the day one session. Tomorrow we are gonna come back again with the day two session as well also. So till then, I'd like to say goodbye and